Have you ever wondered how a massive airliner packed with passengers, luggage, crew, and fuel manages to get off the ground and soar through the skies? It almost seems like magic, doesn't it? But of course, there's a scientific explanation for this everyday occurrence. In this video, I'll explain in simple terms, for anyone with no prior knowledge, how planes carry all that weight, fly thousands of miles, and land safely. The basics: how planes fly. Let's start with the basics. Every time you board a flight, you're stepping into an aircraft that weighs hundreds of thousands of pounds. For example, a Boeing 737 might weigh about 90 tons. A fully laden Airbus A380 might weigh about 625 tons. Between the plane itself, fuel, passengers, and cargo, it's almost hard to believe it can take off. But the secret to flight lies in four main forces: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. Think of lift as the invisible hand that pushes the plane upwards. Lift is created by the wings. As the plane accelerates down the runway, air flows over and under the wings. Thanks to their aerofoil shape, the wings cause the air pressure below them to be higher than the air pressure above them. This pressure differential is what lifts the plane into the air. On the other side of the equation, weight is the force caused by gravity pulling the plane down. So the aircraft needs to generate enough lift to overcome all that weight. The force it needs to gather enough speed so that the lift is strong enough to overcome the weight is thrust. Thrust is the forward force produced by the engines, helping the aircraft to accelerate along the runway in its takeoff run until it has enough lift to leave the ground. The opposite of thrust is drag, the resistance caused by air as it flows around the whole aircraft as it moves through the air. So, just keep in mind those four forces of flight: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. Takeoff, getting off the ground. Now that we understand the forces at play, how does the plane actually take off with all that weight on board? For this, we must rely on the engines. Most modern airliners use jet engines. Over the years, they've become more and more efficient so that some airliners now have 2 on long-haul flights when they used to need 4. Think of these engines like giant air pumps. They suck in air, compress it, mix it with fuel, and then burn it, creating a massive blast of exhaust that shoots out the back. This blast pushes the plane forward, and the faster the plane goes, the more air flows over the wings. Once the plane reaches a certain speed, typically around 150 to 180 miles per hour, the wings generate enough lift to overcome the weight of the plane. At this point, the nose of the plane lifts off the runway, and just like that, the aircraft is airborne. It's important to remember that takeoff requires a lot of power. To carry passengers, luggage, and fuel, the engines work at full capacity, burning lots of fuel to create enough thrust. That's why takeoff can feel so intense. The pilot will apply full power to the engine so that the aircraft builds up enough speed to generate the lift that then overcomes its own weight and launches it into the sky. Cruising, flying long distances. Once in the air, the plane quickly climbs to its cruising altitude. For most flights, this is around 30,000 to 40,000 feet, high above the clouds. You might wonder why planes fly so high. The answer is simple: it's more efficient. Up here, the air is thinner, which means there's less drag slowing the plane down. The engines don't have to work as hard, so they burn less fuel. At cruising altitude, the engines keep the plane moving forward, but not at full power. They adjust to just the right speed to maintain balance. The lift generated by the wings keeps the plane steady in the air, and with less resistance, the flight can continue smoothly for hours. It's also during this time that the plane uses most of its fuel. While it's true that a plane needs a lot of fuel for takeoff, cruising is where the majority is burned over time. Depending on the size of the aircraft and the length of the journey, airliners can carry thousands of gallons of fuel. And to save on fuel costs, pilots follow carefully planned routes to avoid bad weather and fly with the wind whenever possible. This reduces fuel consumption, helping the plane fly more efficiently and saving the airline money. Landing, descending safely. Eventually the airliner will approach its destination and preparations will begin for its landing. But how does it do that safely, especially with all the weight still on board? When a flight is approaching its destination, the pilots begin to lower the altitude gradually. This process is called descent. The plane doesn't just drop down quickly, it's a slow, controlled process that begins about 30 minutes before landing. The pilots reduce the engine power so the plane starts losing altitude while still moving forward. With the aircraft's nose now pointing down from the horizontal, the wings produce less lift because the air pressure difference decreases. At the same time, the plane's weight starts to take over, pulling it back down to earth. But don't worry, the plane is still moving fast enough to stay in control, and the pilots carefully guide it towards the runway, once they've flown a sequence of gentle turns according to the instructions from the air traffic controllers. Eventually the aircraft is on its final approach with the runway dead ahead, even if the pilots can't see it due to adverse weather. When the plane is just about to touch down, the pilot deploys flaps on the wings. These flaps increase drag and reduce lift, slowing the plane down even more. As soon as the wheels hit the runway, the engines are reversed to help the plane slow down quickly, and eventually the wheel brakes are applied once the aircraft is traveling slowly enough. If you are sitting in a window seat, the near wings, you can watch the flaps being deployed on the final descent. They are at the back of the wings, and sometimes there are some at the front or leading edge of the wings. How do aircraft wings handle all that weight? One question you might still have is, how do aircraft fly in all weathers, with all that fuel, luggage, and people on board, without being damaged? Aircraft are carefully designed to handle heavy loads, and their wings are designed to flex a little in the changing currents of air. They're made of strong, lightweight materials, like aluminium alloys and carbon fiber, which keeps them sturdy but not too heavy. Before every flight, the pilots calculate the total weight of the plane, including passengers, cargo, and fuel, to make sure it's within the safe limits for takeoff. Each plane also has a carefully designed fuel system. Fuel is stored in the wings and sometimes in the belly of the aircraft, and it's used gradually throughout the flight. By burning fuel, the plane's weight decreases as it flies, which makes landing a bit easier than takeoff. And of course, pilots are highly trained to handle all kinds of situations, from taking off with heavy loads to landing in challenging weather conditions. So, to recap, how does an airliner packed with fuel, passengers, and luggage get into the air and fly for hours before landing? It's all about balancing the forces of lift, weight, thrust, and drag. The engines provide the power, the wings generate lift, and with careful planning and skilled pilots, the plane soars across continents and oceans. Next time you're on a flight, you'll know exactly how that plane, with all its weight, stays up in the sky, and how it safely gets you to your destination. If you found this explanation of how airliners fly interesting, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more simple explanations on how things work. Got a question or want us to cover a topic? Let us know in the comments below.